Pode ser o Grupo Corpo ou a Companhia de Dança do Pantanal. Museu de Arte Moderna de São Paulo ou Arte em Cores. Filarmônica de Minas Gerais ou Programa Vale Música. Restauração do Museu Nacional ou da Cripta da Basílica de Nazaré. Onde tem cultura, a Vale está. Dos projetos que todo mundo já conhece, até aqueles projetos que todo mundo precisa conhecer. A cultura brasileira tem o nosso apoio. É valorizando essa cultura que crescemos e evoluímos juntos. Instituto Cultural Vale.
Mobilidade é vida. Somos a CCR. Estamos presentes em 13 estados brasileiros e em outros 3 países. Unidos por um único propósito: melhorar a vida das pessoas através da mobilidade. A inovação sustentável nos aponta a direção, as necessidades de nossos clientes, as oportunidades. Valorizamos os encontros, valorizamos a vida.
Caixa, o banco com milhões de clientes que sempre tem um olhar especial para quem mais importa, você. É por você que tem nos benefícios sociais a esperança para superar os desafios. É por você que tem direito à moradia digna e quer realizar o sonho da casa própria. É por um país que acredita na união e reconstrução, com mais diversidade, sustentabilidade e muitas oportunidades. Caixa, é por você, é por um novo Brasil.
As desculpas para não procurar o Sebrae. É empreendedor? Ligue, mande um zap, vá ao Sebrae ou ele vai até você. Ah, e tem tudo no portal. Sebrae, a força do empreendedor brasileiro.
Eu sou uma das integrantes do coletivo Somar Economia Solidária. A gente organiza dentro da Praça Aberta o Ocupa Flip, né, o Ocupa Paraty Flip, desde 2017. E a proposta do Ocupa dentro da Praça Aberta é justamente trazer a comunidade para dentro e para muito mais perto da Flip, né? Eu vejo que daqui, né, a 20 anos a gente consiga ainda mais recursos para a gente conseguir abraçar mais pessoas, né? Eu vislumbro isso, sabe? Eu acho que o Ocupa Flip ele também está aí para provocar, né? Eu acho que foi uma forma que a gente veio no primeiro ano de provocar, de falar assim, olha, existe uma comunidade que quer participar mesmo da Flip, assim, sabe? A gente não quer só carregar material, a gente não quer só... A gente quer estar dentro, a gente quer mostrar o nosso material, a gente quer estar bem inserido. E está acontecendo, né? E eu acho que é isso, assim, eu espero que mais pessoas cheguem, eu espero que as comunidades locais tenham mais voz nas mesas também, né, nas principais mesas. Eu acho que a Flip já tem feito isso de forma bem bacana, mas a gente quer ver o povo daqui, né? A gente quer ver cara daqui, sabe? A gente acha muito importante vir o pessoal de fora, que eu acho que é muito bacana, mas a gente quer ver o povo daqui e continuar vendo o povo daqui trabalhando aqui, sabe?
Flip, o encontro da literatura com a cidade. Ministério da Cultura e a Associação Casa Azul apresentam 21ª Flip, Festa Literária Internacional de Paraty. A Flip conta com benefício da Lei de Incentivo à Cultura, Lei Rouanet, PRONAC 231427, e possui acessibilidade para pessoas com deficiência física, visual e auditiva. Tem patrocínio Master, Instituto Cultural Vale. Patrocínio Ouro, Itaú. CCR e Caixa. Patrocínio Prata, o Globo, Mac Imóveis e Sebrae. Patrocínio Bronze, Globo Livros e Eletronuclear. Parceria institucional SESC. Prefeitura de Paraty, Embratur e Museu do Território. É uma concepção, Associação Casa Azul. Realização, Ministério da Cultura, Governo Federal, Brasil, União e Reconstrução. Flip, o encontro da literatura com a cidade.
Hello, good evening. I am Fernanda Bastos, and along with Milena Brito, I am one of the curators for Flip 2023. I would like to thank you all for coming and to pay tribute to this important moment. It's almost the end of our day, our second day for Flip, and almost the end because we also have some performances. We started the day with a performance by Juliana Perdigão, and later on at 10, here right next to the main tent on the stage, we will have the presentation by Marina Wisnik. So she will do the second performance. So I invite you all to come and join us. And without further ado, I would like to invite Rita Palmeira, our mediator for the day, and she will make the connection between Natalia Timerman and Sinéad Gleeson. Good evening. Am I breathing into the microphone?
Bom, boa noite. Uma noite iluminada.
Well, good evening to a lit and unlit evening here at the city. We are having power issues around the city. So welcome, one and all, to the 7th roundtable, bringing together Sinéad Gleeson and Natalia Timerman. And I would like to once again thank you. And I said again because I was here earlier today, a couple of hours ago. I would like to thank Fernanda and Milena, curators of Flip, for having invited me. It was such a pleasure to find out and to discover Sinéad, and such a joy also to talk to Natalia, someone that I have been keeping track of and through time. And I wrote, very moved to her. I wrote her a letter when I finished her last book, so it was a gift to me. And this is why I also would like to thank you. Well, the title is Remembrances of Everything That Happened. Will truly makes us think about the hyperbole it brings. But it wouldn't be absurd to state that Sinéad and Natalia, if they, of course, do not have remembrances of everything that did happen, they did live many things. And they have formalized in their writing their many experiences, some of them painful experiences. You will hear them, and you will see how these are two brilliant women, very sensitive, brave, and they are sunny people, even though they narrate pain. And it's such a pleasure to have them here with me. Sinéad Gleeson is Irish. She's a writer, and in a certain way, these two qualities, Irish and writer, will have a light in it. She's also a journalist, a presenter. She organized anthologies of Irish women such as The Long Gaze Back and The Glass Shore, and an anthology of short stories, The Art of Glimpse. Last year, along with King Gordon from Sonic Youth, she organized a collection of essays on music called This Woman's Work, Essays on Music. Well, music and Sinéad are, well, something, a whole story in and of itself. And this is what she says, just to give you a taste of what she says. She says, there are people whose memories are invoked by scents, images, but it's music that always brings some kind of alchemy or archaeology in my brain. Constellations, the book that has just launched by Relicário, has 12 essays about body, disease, maternity, grief, the feminine condition in Ireland, and not only that. It won the Irish Book Award and the Best Awards of Non-Fiction. The Brazilian edition, that has some differences for the original one, will bring a bonus to all your readers, a tasty essay published originally in Granta, and where Sinéad will narrate her trip to Brazil in 2018. Right after the election of Jair Bolsonaro, which, among other adventures, she was even in Jurerê International. This essay has as a title, I Know What Is the Spring, Clarice, Chronics, and Corcovado. And I was joking with Sinéad earlier today that now that she knows Paraty in November, she's ready to write, I Know What Summer Is. Even though, and this is scary, technically we are still in spring. Well, she will launch her first novel, Hexton, and we are very anxious to read it and to have her with us shortly again. Natalia Timerman, I guess you all know her, so I will just brief introduction. Counting that you already know her, she's a bestseller writer. She is a writer and she's Brazilian. She has 4 published books. One of them, which is something I love, and I love this book. It is her less known work. It's called Desterros, Stories of a Prison Hospital. It was launched by Elefantes in 2017. And Natalia, in this book, Natalia, who's also a psychiatrist, she will tell the story about her experience in the hospital center of the penitentiary system. Her essay book, short story called Rachaduras, Cracks, in a free translation, was launched by Quelônio in 2019. Brings together a number of short stories that deal with different topics, but most of them is about women. not only these two books, there are other two books that are based on actual experience and transformed into fiction. And this is the bestseller, which is Copo Vazio from 2021. And the most recent one is The Low Odds. They are all edited by Todavia. And she also has a column at UOL website. Well, a prolific writer, she is. And I'm sure everybody has heard about it. In her books, she will talk about different pains, grief, love, incarceration, Brazilian misery, but all this from the standpoint of a woman. And the name of the translator of Sinéad's book, and I guess she's here, her translator is here today. And it is essential because this book, to bring format to this book, her name, and she is Maria Rita Drummond Viana. Sinéad, Natalia, welcome to Paraty, welcome to this rival. Sinéad, welcome to Brazil. And I will start with a question for you, Sinéad, about the beginning of your book. For those who haven't read it yet, it starts with the following sentence: the body is always left for later. And it will certainly summarize, but not deal with the whole book. So if you could please read the beginning of your book and maybe talk about what you meant with this.
Amazing country, and I'm very grateful to Flip, so obrigada. This essay is called Blue Hills and Chalk Bones. I will just read a small part, but it starts when I was a teenager. The body is an afterthought. We don't stop to think of how the heart beats its steady rhythm, or watch our metatarsals fan out with every step. Unless it's involved in pleasure or pain, we pay this moving mass of vessel, blood, and bone no mind. The lungs inflate, muscles contract, and there is no reason to assume they won't keep on doing so until one day something changes. A corporeal blip. The body, its presence, its weight, is both an unignorable entity and routinely taken for granted. But I started paying particular attention to mine in the months after turning 13, when a pain, persistent and new, began to slow me down. My body was sending panicked signals, but I could not figure out what they meant. The synovial fluid in my left hip began to evaporate like rain. The bones ground together, literally turning to dust. It happened quickly, an inverse magician's trick. Now you don't see it, now you do. From basketball and sprinting to bone sore with a limp, hospital stays became frequent, and I missed the first 3 months of school 4 years in a row.
Would you like to maybe comment this first part and maybe talk about your book?
I did not think I was writing a book. I didn't sit down to write a book. And the great thing about the essay as a form is that you can write one, and then you can write another one about a different thing, and another one, and they don't have to be in the right order. And this experience happened to me in my teenage years, and I think sometimes when something very traumatic happens to you, because from 13 to 17 I was mostly in hospital, or having surgery. I missed a lot of school, and those years are very formative. So you want to be with your friends and go to clubs, and and I was just always in hospital. So I think it can take a long time to write about something that's traumatic. So you need distance. And I didn't think I would write about this. So it was a little bit of a surprise that I did. And when I started to write about it, I realized an essay is never about one subject. It's always about a lot of things. So the first version of this essay, because this is an essay about me going on a school trip to Lourdes, which is a place of pilgrimage in France. And Ireland is a very Catholic country, and I used to be very Catholic. I'm not now. But I believed then that I was going to go to Lourdes and get cured and get a miracle. And then it didn't happen. So it took a long time to write this particular essay because it's hard to write difficult subjects. And I think we all need distance from things that happen to us that cast a huge shadow over our whole lives.
Okay. Natalia.
Natalia, the epigraph of Low Odds is a quotation by Annie Ernaux, and it says the following: a familiar story, collective stories are one single thing. So if you could comment and then read the initial part of your book. You can do it in whatever order once. You might read and then comment the sentence, or the other way around, as you wish.
Good evening. It's a huge pleasure to be here, and I want to thank Milena and Fernanda for the invitation. It's very significant. I've attended Flip to be on this side, up on the stage. One of the initial points was Flip in 2019, attending my friend Tatiana Levi, who's not here. She's in Portugal. It was really moving for me and important to be here on this side on the stage. I'm going to begin by reading the excerpt, after which I'll comment on that quote. It takes several seconds to understand why that face was so familiar to me in such a different context. The airport, and so many years had gone by when I had seen him for the last time at the hospital, one day before my father's death. I must have smiled. He also smiled, and he approaches me. He comes a little closer, somewhat changed, but I think later that he recognized me quicker, which is strange, or it should be, because physicians have thousands of patients, and the patients and their family members, just one doctor in each situation, although my father was also a doctor, and myself too. Over the course of those days, we were patients, or rather, my father was Dr. Felipe's patient, a palliative care physician, and I, just the daughter of a man with a terminal disease. It's a paradox to talk about mourning and feeling joy to be here, because the book emerged from pain, and it's a leap to talk about this first paragraph, which is such a personal pain, to the epigram, which is precisely to talk about this connection with the family history and the collective history. They're one and the same. When I was writing the third part of this book, I was reading the years, and when I read by Annie Ernaux, this phrase, it was a key for the years. It was the point of departure is a personal pain. Much of what I write starts, the point of departure is personal pain, but the more personal, the more we are able to reach the other people's personal in the collective. And this book specifically, the first two parts of the book are focused more on death. My father's death, it was a very real experience. It's autobiographical. And the void that occurred with his death opened many questions for me, raised many questions, and showed me the gaps of my own knowledge of my family's own story, my own story of how I am who I am. And that was based on this void that I began to ask these questions and pose them and investigate and study a story which is that of my family. And I realized that it was the story of a lot more people, both the story of the Jews who came, who migrated in the last century, at different times in the last century, to Brazil, to São Paulo specifically, but also it's the story of each family. It's the story of every family's story is composed of what we know, but much more from what we don't know. And it's our existence. It's what we do and what we don't do, what we hear and what we never hear. And the silences. It was this. That was what this epigram as the key opens up is this. It's these silences, and with fiction, I attempted to identify. Sinéad, your book, this idea of a family story, it's a personal story at the limit, which combines with a collective story or history. In your introduction, I said she's a writer and Irish, and these two characteristics shed light on each other. You point of departure in your essays are personal experiences, but you, in some way, give a public dimension, collective dimension for what you're saying in the discussion. For example, on woman's body and several of the topics that you address. So I ask if this epigram, Natalia, isn't it appropriate for at least part of your essays as well? What do you think?
Is completely right when she says that even when you think you're telling your own story, it ends up being much more universal. And my experience of this book, and there's a lot of different things in my book, I talk about grief, I talk about terrible doctors, I talk about surgery, I talk about religion, I talk about Ireland and abortion laws and reproductive rights and the terrible things that have been done to women in Ireland. But even when you're trying to write your own version of a story, whether it's about your own family or your own body, you'll meet all sorts of people who come up and tell you their version of the story, and it's not the same. And I have a line in the book where I talk about that, if everybody in this room was to break their leg, the break wouldn't be the same, the pain wouldn't be the same, the break wouldn't be in the same place. We'd all have a different experience of a thing that is a singular thing. And that's the thing that's been most revelatory to me about writing about things that I think are just about me. Because when you do write about your own life, you have a fear, which is, will this be interesting to anybody? Is this self-indulgent? Who wants to hear this? And yet my experience of meeting readers is that people focus on different parts of the book but feel connected to it. It's not the same as my story, but it overlaps enough for them to feel what the Irish writer Maeve Brennan calls a moment of recognition. And I think that's so it's you think you're writing about yourself, but people who don't know you will find something to connect in your story, because we're all connected, and we're all connected by stories, ultimately.
E você falou agora do...
You mentioned just now the doctors, and that's my next question for both of you, because one of the books by Natalia, the one I just cited, Exiles, Desterros, her experience as a doctor, as a psychiatrist in a prison hospital, mostly male, this prison hospital in Constellation. Sinéad talks a lot about her experience, as she's saying now, with doctors and hospitals, and specifically with orthopedists who, just like in Brazil, I discovered that in Ireland, they're also mostly men, the orthopedists, right? And in Sinéad's book, there's something which is fascinating. Any person who has already had in the past or witnessed, or in their own experience, or witnessed a loved one hospitalized will know what she's talking about. It's the following. She says, a patient is not a person. The patient is a medicalized version of themselves. They're the dual of the hospitalized body. To become a patient is an act of transmutation from healthy to ill, from free citizen to hospitalized patient. So I have this image because we could talk about free citizens and patients hospitalized for you in exiles, but also you talk a lot about your experience of your father's hospitalization in the low odds and a good experience with a physician, right? But in a word, I would like for you to talk a little bit about this relationship with the world, the medical world, and not from the place necessarily of that of a physician, but could be the daughter of the patient, about other hospitals from this angle of a body that's manipulated, handled, and it loses something of its identity. Especially, I would like for you to think about the gender issue. Sinéad talks a lot about this, of how women are especially, particularly treated in a hospital environment. Who would like to begin? I can begin. Is this embarrassing for you or not? Is it a doctor talking about doctors? That's fine. I have no problem with that. You can speak as a writer. Okay, but I'll begin. I love Exiles, my book, because it's precisely the convergence of Natalia, who writes, and Natalia, the physician. And I think that was my point of departure to become a writer. I've always wanted to write. I was a child who said that I wanted to be a writer whenever people asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I grew up and I became a doctor. And so I began.
There's definitely more money in medicine.
Eu não entendi.
There's more money to be made in medicine than in writing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, when I began to work in the prison hospital, I just started my master's program in a different project. I said, I have to write about this place. I need to study and look at this place and write about it. And I was a woman, MD, treating men. And one of the feelings that before I began to work there in the prison hospital, everybody asked me, aren't you afraid? What about treating men, inmates? Don't you feel threatened by these male inmates? And I think there were a number of issues. No, I said, I wasn't afraid. I didn't feel threatened. There were very few moments in which I felt threatened working there in the prison hospital. But in Exiles, there's a convergence in this book, Exiles. I began to write the book. It was as a doctor that I began to write. I perceived, I can't deny that my writing is marked by this view, this clinical view, and I, as a psychiatrist, a view for emotions, feelings, and the labyrinths of feeling and mazes of feeling. And I believe, talk a little bit about the experience as a daughter of a patient, a terminal patient, who was a MD himself. Right, exactly. I was the daughter of the MD, a terminal patient. It was a very good experience with the palliative care doctor. We talk about the palliative care physicians. The main difference in this specialty in comparison to the other specialties is the certainty, and that's obvious. Everybody knows that we're all going to die, but the palliative care physicians, that's their premise. We're facing death. We're always facing death. But in the case of palliative care physicians, this is an immediate truth almost. It's very near at hand. It's a reality to be not confronted in the sense of a war or a battle, but to be traversed. And I believe that when this notion of the proximity of death is not present in medical practice, I think that we end up falling into the opposite pole of a kind of certain omnipotence as the medicine were the salvation. You cure people, but I mean, there's no cure for life. Life is a series of losses and pains, and so what do we do with that also? It's what we do with it. Of course, every illness, there can be a temporary cure, but the cure is always temporary, right? Okay, so I think that this is the main difference, and to be facing death next to my father, who was always the MD, witnessing him as a patient was very transformative for me as an MD and as a writer as well. I think that was the point where I started writing, to see that man who was my father with all his frailty, not wanting a palliative care physician, knowing what that meant to have a palliative care MD treating him. So it was very painful, but very enriching as literary material, of course, when perhaps the more difficult to experience something, the better to write about it later. I think we write, okay? There's nothing to do, so I write, okay? How I dealt with it. And I think that's basically the issue. I don't know if I answered your question. I think so, yeah, you did. Sinéad.
Você quer que eu refaça?
Do you want me to repeat the question about hospitals, doctors, the gender issue?
Conta bastante.
You tell a lot about this, right? In this first essay, right?
And as you mentioned, the time that I was ill in my teenage years, I don't think I met, and I have a hip replacement now, which was done by a man who was an awful person, but he did the job, and he was, I encountered a lot of sexism, a lot of dismissal, and I'm very aware that, that I'm a white, cis, middle-class woman, so I can't imagine, and my first language is English in Ireland, but, if I was an immigrant, if I was a trans person, if I was a queer person, if I was an elderly person, if I had, if I was autistic, if I had any kind of issue because I think when you are a patient and you're not being listened to, you need to be your own lobbyist. You need to be your own advocate, and not everybody can do that. And I learned at a really young age that I had to do that because I encountered so much dismissal or being told, no, that's not what's wrong with you. At one point after a hip surgery, I had this plaster cast from here down to my ankles on both legs, and to take it off, a doctor came in with a saw and said, I'm going to do this, and it's fine. It rotates back and forward. It's not going to hurt. It hurt a lot, and I still have the 6 scars on my leg from him saying it's not hurting, and sending my mother out of the room because she was distressed and I was distressed. So, that feeling, it's a very powerless feeling if you're a patient. And a hospital is a very vulnerable place to be. You're not at home, everything's unfamiliar, it's noisy, you're sick. So you feel very vulnerable. So if somebody who the person you're meant to trust the most, who is the doctor, comes in and dismisses you, or doesn't look you in the eye, or doesn't use your first name, or comfort you, that makes you feel even more ill at ease. But I've also encountered a lot of good doctors. Also, lovely Rita, my translator, her mother and her husband are doctors. And there's a very good doctor sitting to my right. So not all doctors are terrible, but in my experience, I have encountered a lot of dismissal and not being listened to. And a lot of those people, unfortunately, were male doctors. Yeah, very gendered.
Yeah. Bom, a gente vai dos
So we're going from hospitals now to motherhood, but not the maternity hospital, but maternity in the sense of motherhood and children. I think that one of the books that some of the short stories by Natalia in Rachaduras, the cracks, focus on the exhaustion of motherhood, especially in the first months after giving birth, and a little bit about how this overburdens women at this time of care, practically exclusive care for the newborn children. Sinéad talks about this, about her experience, for example, when she became pregnant and the complications, health complications that she experienced, in addition to which she does this in a very generous way. That's what I was saying about the collective, personal and collective, this interface, because she treats motherhood. She begins thinking of motherhood as a fate and a choice. To talk about abortion, you talk at great length about abortion in Ireland, and the issue of the abortion issue in Ireland. So this chapter, this essay, begins when she questions strikingly women being fated to become mothers. So this imposition of motherhood. So how can one talk about motherhood as a choice, not as fate? Fate, and having made the choice, thinking of your short stories now, how can we not overburden women? I'm thinking of in Brazil, people have talked about the economy of care and all that, and somewhat how we compile and write up domestic care, caring for one, and normally it's women who do provide the care. So these things intersect. But I would love to hear you about that. Both mothers, right?
Bom, acho que para começar eu preciso dizer que nesse momento.
Well, first, who's taking care of my children is my partner, so that I could be here with you. And probably this is an exception. I guess most of the time this load will be on women's shoulders. And I guess another difference I see from my story with regard to maternity and writing of most women is that what I hear a lot is, and I also read a lot about how much the maternity experience will make women leave writing behind. But to me, it was quite the contrary. I started writing right after I became a mother. And it's curious because I started writing exactly about the difficulties of being a mother, and I didn't know. I didn't have children in my family. I was the first one to have children in my close relatives, my close family. I had no idea the chaos it was to have a baby, not sleeping, and I felt that I was cheated. That was my feeling. Why didn't no one tell me? I felt cheated, you know? We see these beautiful pregnant women walking around happy, and I would look at all the pregnant women and say, you're happy? You have no idea what's up, you know, what's coming up in the beginning. So I was really scared, terrified. Someone should have told me when people are pregnant. I remember the first time I went out alone without my son, and I would look at people and said, the parents of these people do not know where they are. So one day it's going to happen that I will not know where my son is, exactly what they're doing. Now, for instance, I have no idea. They're in São Paulo and I'm here, so I don't know what they're doing, what they're up to. So to write about all these things, I guess it's twice as important because there are many facets. There's an overlapping of things. I've wrote already once that writing about maternity is a guilt-ridden writing, because when you're writing, you're not caring for your children because you're doing something else. But and literature is not my bread and butter. It's as if I didn't have to do it. I'm not obliged to do it to make money. It's like, you know, it's a luxury I give myself. So it's a dilemma. No one will, of course, no one tells me this, but it's a load that I carry regardless. Even if my husband is the one who's caring for my children most of the time anyways, in order for me to be here. So, and I guess maternity will, even in the short stories of Rachaduras, the book, clearly it's more present. In all my books, you see maternity issues. And Low Odds, for instance. And also, sorry to interrupt, but in Rachaduras, you have this topic of the exhaustion that comes with motherhood. I guess the first short stories, when you talk about the exhaustion of being a mother. Yes, and Low Odds maternity will show up in a different way. It quite the opposite, almost, because when I started writing, I had I had a scholarship to participate in a literary residency in a project that would question maternity. It was almost like a game of a woman who was in a waiting room. This was never written. It was just a project. She was in a waiting room of a abortion clinic, and she was deciding if she was going to have this child or not, and how these different possibilities would happen. But when my father died, I didn't feel able to question the fact of being a mother, not even in fiction. I needed my children at that time. So in Low Odds, I almost needed to be a mother. I needed that existence. I needed my kids to exist. So it's a different approach for on maternity than what I had in Rachaduras. How about you, Sinéad? And the women, the right to choose?
I very similarly to Natalia, I didn't write until I had my children. My writing came after my children, and I had been busy with work and various things. And there is one thing that parenthood is, you know, it's really interesting. I have been at different festivals where people will ask women, how do you juggle it all? But they don't ask male writers that, but they do ask women that, even though, you know, both people are parents and have children. And I think, if anything, being a parent teaches you have to be really, really good with your time. So you do find that if you really want to write, and writing is not an easy thing to do, it requires so much time and energy and dedication, and fitting it around all your other commitments can be difficult. But to me, I think writing actually motherhood brought something to my writing. Like, there were lots of interruptions where, you know, you'd be trying to write. I used to have, you know, Virginia Woolf says that for a woman to write, she needs to have a room of her own. I used to have a room of my own, and then my children got bigger, and now I don't have a room of my own, so I'm just at the kitchen table. But when I had that room, they would come in and, you know, they would ask me to do Lego or tell me that the dog had peed in the kitchen, so the interruptions were kind of welcome. I sort of liked the door being half open. There's a very famous quote by a man called Cyril Connolly who said, "The enemy of great art is the pram in the hallway." And I don't know if I agree with that, basically saying that once you have a child or motherhood will get in the way of your writing. But I absorb my motherhood into my writing. I think I wouldn't be the same writer if I wasn't a mother, and maybe I wouldn't have written ever if I'd been a mother. But you get very good with your time when you're busy and you have a day job and you have children. You get very good at learning how to find the time for writing. And writing is a kind of thing that you don't need 5 hours a day. I never have 5 hours a day to write. But just trying to do it at the same time every day, or early in the day, or finding half an hour, or sitting in your car outside the school, or, you know, on the bus to something, or voice notes. So people tell me all the time, I have no time to write. You do. You just, even if it's 10 minutes, you can find it. And then 10 minutes can be 400 words, and then it's 800 words, then it's 1,000 words. And writing is an act of, accrual. The words build up. So it is hard when you're tired and kids are small, but I found I wanted to write more because I knew I didn't have the time. So, yeah, I did type it a little faster.
Would you like to talk about your hours in writing, how you write, when you write? Earlier today, the three of us and Natalia had watched the table I presented earlier, and she said, I would love you to ask about when I write. And I said, I did not forecast this, but now let me ask you, when do you write? At what time do you write? Yes, it's like Sinéad said, you have to invent it. This time does not exist. So when do you write? Anytime, whenever I'm able to. Being a psychiatrist, being a mother, and being a writer, I mean, sometimes when a patient doesn't show up or cancels, or, what do I like to write? I like to write in the morning, but I'm never able to do so. And it's, whenever I have time, that's it. And also I take notes, sometimes, and 1,000 books and notebooks on my cell phone. And I'm always thinking, I guess I'm writing the whole time in my mind. And then when I sit on the computer, things are already sort of entailed, already written, so to speak. I guess the entry for the text, the start of the text is already given. But I ride with kids calling me, with closed doors, with open doors, whenever I'm able to. Anywhere and anywhere. Sinéad, I would like to talk to you a little bit about the format of your short stories, of your essays. I guess you discovered something there, didn't you? We talked about this earlier today. There's something very interesting in the way, if you haven't written yet, of the way she structures her essays, if you haven't read it yet. So the genre is good for that. But I'll give you an example. In one short story, she starts talking about hair, discussing gender issues, attitudes, and then all of a sudden, in a plot twist, she talks about the leukemia diagnosis she was given. So she will build in a very specific, particular way, which is, as I was saying earlier, it is a more collective way of building it. And then you talk about your own experience. Is there something that's also that other moment when you talk about blood? Yeah, the matter is blood. It might be not very literary, unless it was the glories of Big Hero. And she questions that. And she says, the blood infiltrated fluid in our language and etymology, the cold blood of the murderer, the hot blood of the lovers, the magic bloods, blood diamonds, with thirst, bloodthirst. So she starts to show us how this idea of blood can be read in different ways, and expressions, and assimilation by the masculine universe, giving examples of pop culture. So I'd like to hear from you a little bit about this format, this sort of grasping that allows you to write in this way, because it's very specific to you, it seems.
Yeah, I didn't set out to write a book. I didn't think I was writing a book, because that would have been too terrifying. So if you fool yourself and say, I'll just write one little essay over here, and then maybe I'll write another one, and then you start to fool your brain then that this might be something. But I didn't ever say to myself it was going to be a book. And the thing about the essay as a form, I think it's more versatile than short stories, than poetry. It's a very, maybe you don't know the word bendy, like elastic. You can twist it and turn. It can be 400 words, it can be 40,000 words. An essay is a very malleable form. And for me, some of the material in the book was going to be very difficult. So the essay on blood is about a leukemia diagnosis. And again, that's one part of the essay. But I'm fascinated by blood and science. So it's an essay about DNA, it's an essay about ancestry, it's an essay about blood performance artists. Mm-hmm. It's about religion and the use of blood in religion. So it's about a load of different things. So an essay, if you imagine the essay to be, it's like a container, like a box, and you can pour lots of different things into it, and they can sit very comfortably, even different subjects, side by side in an essay. And that's why I like the form. It's very versatile. So this book, I mean, the version in the Brazilian version is shorter, but I was able to talk about multiple subjects in one text, and that's what I like about it, that you can go off in different directions and then find connections and find links to these things. There's another essay called Where Does It Hurt?, which is about the experience of pain, and I based it on a thing called the McGill Pain Index, which is a collection of 77 words in 20 groups, where a doctor will tell you, if you check boxes, what your experience of pain is. I mentioned the leg break earlier. Like if you try to describe your headache, or I describe a headache, or you do, mm-hmm. the experience isn't the word, and isn't going to be the same. But also, doctors came up with the words, not patients. So there's even that power, and I think pain, and Virginia Woolf herself said this, trying to describe pain, it's a very inexpressible thing. It's very hard to tell somebody where your pain is or how your soreness is. You can, but the language is not, it isn't enough. So that essay I divided into 20 small little micro essays. They look like, on the page, they look like poems, but sometimes if you can use the form to tackle a big subject, but use it to break it down or to swim around into loads of other subjects. Because I wasn't interested, that's why the book is not a memoir. It doesn't start at the start and end at the end. And the memoir is, maybe sometimes written when you're very old, or I'm not dead. The last time I checked, I'm not dead. So I'm not finished telling stories. And also lots of my life is quite boring. So I just focused on the parts that I wanted to talk about, and the rest of it you wouldn't want to hear about anyway. So.
I would like to maybe to talk about a text that was not included in the Brazilian edition, because curiously enough, the texts that were not part of the Brazilian edition have a straight relation with Natalia's books, and especially about one text, which is the one that the book that Natalia is writing now. Natalia is going to write about Alzheimer's disease, her mother's Alzheimer's disease. And there's this essay by Sinéad on the original edition of the book, in which she talks about Alzheimer's of an aunt of hers, a second mother to her. And it's very moving, emotional, because it does talk about this figure, this relative who's there but isn't there, and how it was to be there while she was dying. So for us to close the topic of disease, if you could talk about this. And then we go to Jurerê Internacional to talk about this. Who would like to start?
I can begin. Illness, grief, and loss. Okay? Okay, my mother has Alzheimer's, and it's curious, I said a phrase that I hadn't read in Sinéad's book. She said she wrote exactly this, which was to talk about someone with Alzheimer's is not to know whether we're referring to this person in the present tense or in the past tense. It's this temporal indefinition, and grief is grief. It's very different from grief that I experienced at the end of my father's life, his death. My mother's life, as I knew her, as my mother, as someone who could offer care, and then we go back to this issue of the caring role ended. This is ended now. There's this reversal. I'm the one who cares for her now. And it's very different from the experience with my father. When my father was ill, I didn't note anything. I didn't write anything. I was simply there with him. But now, and afterwards, I wrote several months later a major portion of the book, The Low Odds. With my mother's illness, I purchased a notebook, a small notebook, which has on the cover a woman who unravels the embroidery. That's the feeling of some embroidery that is unraveled. And I take notes in this notebook, this voice that I address. It's like a diary, right? The diary of loss. And recently I've referred to her. I went to visit you. You said this, that, or the other. And it's a way I discover a lot of things. It's raining now. It's raining on us, literally dripping. A raindrop is dropping on our stage, right? Okay. I forgot where I was. Okay. Okay, I'm forgetting myself. Okay. I think it's a way of working through and understanding and assimilating and saving this memory of her that is vanishing, that's kept there in the writing rather than vanishing entirely. This first volume of the notebook, I'm almost finishing it, but I had to almost superstitiously leave the last page blank. as though I could not finish it. That notebook, I couldn't end it before her, and I'm still collecting. I think it's the opposite. She's losing. My son said that Alzheimer's is like a puzzle that we take the pieces out of the jigsaw puzzle. We get jigsaws, we get definitions from others, from children especially. So it's like a jigsaw puzzle that you're removing the pieces one by one. And I'm still at this time of collecting. I've written a few things already, and I got as a present a story which came to me in a very impressive way, a story of my family, impressive family secrets that came to me, and it totally changed the way that I see my mother. I can't ask her anymore. The language, literature is born from the impossibility. There's no way to ask you, so I write. That's what I do, is to write. And it's very different to write about these two kinds of grief. I think all of my books are about grief, I guess so, right? I guess so, right?
I think it's one of the most cruel illnesses, and at a time in the world where there's so much progressiveness in cancer care, in so many illnesses there are cures. There's still no cure for this, and it's like watching. I have a line in the essay I wrote about my Auntie Terry, where it's like this. It's like an aquarium, that there was a version of her on the outside and a version of her behind the glass, and the one behind the glass is the one that is starting to lose her speech. And she was always very funny and chatty, and that was the first thing I noticed, was that she would repeat herself, or she would start to go quiet because she would be sitting with me and my husband and children having dinner and talking loudly. We'd all be chatting, and she would normally join in, but then I realized that she couldn't follow the conversation. She couldn't keep up. And then she got really good. You would ask her a question and you'd realize she'd ask you a question back, because she was playing for time, trying to figure out it. And you could see, the worst part of it was, before she was fully gone, was seeing it. She realized it was happening to her, and the struggle sometimes on her face to see the words are literally falling out of the back of my head, and it was so heartbreaking. And she was a really clever and brilliant woman, and she painted and was artistic and read so much, and I wish she had seen Constellations, because she was the book is dedicated to her. But it's very, very cruel to watch somebody you love. They become they're a different version. They're not the person they were. So I talk the same way about, I would say she was, but she was still alive. But you would refer to her in the past because you're referring to the version before the illness, and it's really hard. She was. It's very difficult to deal with that.
E ao mesmo tempo ela não é só.
She's not just a body, right? It's different from the situation where we talked about the hospital, and this being there still. It's just another form, and it's also the smell. I've thought about this. How long is she going to be my mother? What does it mean for her what does it mean to be my mother? And her home, it's when she didn't say my name anymore. I went to her home, and I don't know if it was my hangover. She couldn't even do anything anymore, but she went and covered me with a blanket when I had a hangover. And even though she didn't interact with me, I realized her eyes glowed. It's like losing a father and mother, no longer having this gaze which shines when they see you. It lights up. They light up because that person, for those people, they're special creatures on the face of the earth. I feel when I see my children, we have this with our friends, with other people that we meet, and our siblings over the course of our lives. But father and mother, orphanhood, that's what orphanhood means. So, talking about Brazil 2018, when you were here, Sinéad, I'd like for you to tell us a little bit to the audience about your Brazilian essay, or at least about your visit to Brazil in 2018. There are some ingredients in it. You went to Santa Catarina, I think it was, when you met Maria Rita and everything else, and you tell a number of things. There's a relationship with Clarice Lispector. There's our impressions of Brazil, which had just entered full force into the extreme far right. And there's this, I joked with this history of Jurerê International because it's a fate. It's almost eccentric for somebody who's in the southeast of Brazil, but it's a joke, right? So I would like to hear you a little bit about this experience in Brazil in 2018. What was it like?
It was incredible. And to be honest, if I had not come to Brazil in 2018 and met Marita, this book would not exist. So I came to the University of Santa Catarina to discuss an anthology. I also edit books. And this was a collection of books by Irish women writers, and Marita teaches a lot of Irish literature in a different university now. She's not in UFSC anymore. But I met a lot of her students, and I'm interested in politics. I was asking about Bolsonaro, and lots of the students in the class were queer students, LGBT students, who, I think their own families had been encouraging them some had been kicked out of home. Some were encouraged to go back into the closet, and this was the legacy of parents listening to Bolsonaro's rhetoric around queer people, and I found that incredibly distressing. Ireland, a country that's very Catholic and had been very conservative for a very long time, was the first country in the world to pass a same-sex marriage by referendum ahead of anybody else, and it just struck me that, the contrast between those two things. And the students were incredible, and they were really interested in Irish literature. And Marita, when I published this book in English, the week it was published, I was in London doing a launch, and Marita happened to be in London. And she came to the launch and she said, I'm going to translate this book. And she's not a translator. She has translated things. She's an academic. But she just said, I'm going to translate this book. I'm going to find you a publisher. And she did. And I'm so grateful to her. She's amazing.
Nós agradecemos a ela.
We thank her, right? What was it, did it mean to be here after that period? And Clarice Lispector, right? And the Chronicle, because the Chronicle is an ingredient, right, in your essay.
I mentioned the essay, the Where Does It Hurt essay, which is a very short collection. I had not encountered the Chronicle before then. I had read Clarice Lispector's work. I'm a huge fan. I think she's one of the greatest writers, and she reminds me a lot of certain Irish writers. She has like the modernism of James Joyce, the surrealism of Samuel Beckett, and the way she writes about women's lives is like Edna O'Brien, one of our other great writers. The first essay in this book is about this trip to Lourdes that I read from. I was asked to write a follow-up to that essay, and then COVID happened, and the editor, also from Granta, said, have you been anywhere else very interesting that you don't have to travel? And I was like, well, I went to Brazil, and it was fabulous. And he said, okay, write about Brazil. But I wanted to write about a writer as well, because anything I hadn't read by her, I made sure I read before I wrote this essay. You're very lucky to have a writer like her as one of your great writers. She's just, there is nobody like her. I mean, I can't even think of a European or American writer who is like Lispector. She's a completely unique and distinct voice. And I'm always trying to tell people about who she is. Actually, a tiny thing, in the start of this book, in the epigraph, I quote a French writer called Hélène Cixous, who I believe was one of the people who was most responsible for getting Lispector translated in Europe, which I didn't know when I wrote this book, but she got Lispector translated a lot in Europe. So there's lots of connections to Clarice in this book. So she's amazing.
Natalia.
Natalia, you earlier I said you were commenting about your reading of the English version, just reminding people that this essay concerning Brazil doesn't exist in the original edition, and this faixa bonus, this extra chapter of the Relicário. But I said this because Natalia read the English edition, and she commented that she was exactly reading one of the essays, and when she was coming down the mountain, and she heard. I would like for you to talk a little bit about your impression of reading Sinéad. What kind of essay was that? It was an essay called Our Friend, Our Common Friend, Our Mutual Friend, rather. There's a character in the audience even, who is, when I met Sinéad's partner, he's S. People knowing, my brother talked about people were following me after they read your book, right? Okay. This mixture of people in the books and reality, right? And I loved this essay. And it's an essay where Sinéad talks about how she met S, and she talks about a person in a mutual friend whom they lost soon after they met each other. They had already knew each other, but it's amazing how this happened. It was just imagine a couple at the peak of their passion, the height of with the sparks flying, and they were going to meet, and their friend, their mutual friend, their best friend, died in an accident. And this is something that changes their lives. Totally. It's something, these experiences that never leave us. And there's a passage when they talk about grief and mourning. This speaks to my own writing about grief. What is mourning? So, and music, talking about Into My Arms. I had to hear this song now, and came here. I'd listened to the song and totally moved. It was a very rich experience, this reading.
Said earlier that she thinks that a lot of her work is about grief. I think a lot of my work is about mortality, what it is to be alive. You know, whether you encounter illness, whether you encounter dementia, you know, that essay, Our Mutual Friend, not everybody gets to get old, and sometimes terrible things happen, but sometimes great things happen. And I think making your life count, I think I'm always told I'm very busy, but you know, I've encountered a lot of illness in my life, and that makes me think, well, I could be dead soon, so I might as well do a lot of things. So I'm always, I think that's, mortality is interesting to me, because you have to make the life that you have count.
Bom, eu não me acostumo com isso.
I'm not used to this. I had forgotten to look at the watch. I thought somebody was going to let me know that we were running out of time. I just forgot, totally. And the fact is that we've run out of time. I have some announcement and one last question for us to round out and wrap up in a very pleasurable way, but it has to make some announcements first. There's going to be a performance in the Town Square Auditorium. Marina Wisnik and Natalia and Sinéad will be in the Flip bookstore signing their books. To conclude, unfortunately, I said that I had 20 questions. Okay, the autographs are going to be now, right? Okay, sorry. Is that it? Autographs now, performance later, right? Okay, now, everything at the same time. So you pick, okay? Take your pick. I'd like to wrap up with very short answers to the following question. Since we're talking about finitude and re-beginnings, finitudes and re-beginnings, what is a well-lived life, in your opinions? It has to be quick, right? Short and sweet. Rita, I said, you should show us the questions first. You couldn't take us by surprise like this. A well-lived life, in my opinion, is a life where we are able to have like our own story, right? Even with flaws, regret, joy, everything. But I think it's what I mentioned before. Before my father's funeral, he would do everything exactly like that. Even though he would err again. I'd do exactly the same thing. The same errors, the same achievements. It's what makes us who we are. He had a well-lived life. He did. Her father. I said that since we are talking about re-beginnings, infinitudes and re-beginnings, how do you define a well-lived life?
I think if it's made you happy and it hasn't made anybody else unhappy. There's one thing a friend said to me before, and I love this. You know when somebody dies that we love, or somebody famous dies, and I am wearing my Sinéad O'Connor necklace because she was very beloved in Ireland. And a lot of people talked about Sinéad, how much they loved her after she died. A lot of those people were very critical of Sinéad in life. So I have a friend who says that when people are alive, you should give them their flowers now, which is tell people you like them or how much they mean to you when they're here, not when they're gone. And I think that's part of living your life well, I think.
Okay.
Go bang.
Buy their books and run. Do whatever you have to do to be at the autographs and at the performance. Thank you and good evening.